Hi and welcome to the first of a few sort of sessions that we're going to do, just looking at exam papers and looking at the questions and focusing on how we would answer these questions. So this is for section 6, which is for the natural and manufactured timber section. So remember, on the exam paper, your exam paper will look quite thick, but you haven't got to answer all of the sections. The only sections you need to answer with natural timber is the first section, and then you find section 6, which is our natural and manufactured timber. Okay, with this section then we're just going to look at a few of the questions on the exam paper, and these are actual exam papers took from previous exams really. So we're just going to talk you through how we would answer them, and as a moderator's point of view and an examiner, what we're looking for in the question. So the first thing is obviously that there's an image here, and it's relating to a child's toy that is made from natural timber. So it says here, question A, the picture below is of a child's toy made of natural timber. So natural timber obviously means timbers that's either a hardwood or a softwood, and isn't manufactured. And the examples you can see here are various types of wood which have either been stained or coloured, or they could actually be different types of hardwood and softwood. So an example could be the darker wood, could either be mahogany, or it could even have a mahogany stain. You've got the red cedar towards the end, the light brown, and the pine in the middle being light, and possibly even beech used for the wheels. We know that it's natural timber mainly because we've got a grain going through the wood and we can see the end grain as well. So we're assuming now they're going to be asking us questions relating to making a toy using this material. So let's look at question 1. So the first thing we need to notice is how many marks the question is going to be out of, because that will literally relate to the amount of content we have to put into the answer. So an example, a 5-mark question, we would expect students to write a lot more with keywords in, at least 5 keywords maybe for that point to get those marks, whereas with a 1-mark question we're really just looking for a specific answer. So number 1, state the name of the components used to join the wheels of the toy. So if we look on the paper here, we can actually see there's a wooden bar going all the way through, joining the wood with a sort of a head onto the top. So there are a few things that you can actually put as an answer for this. So I'm just going to pause for a second to see if you can remember what the answer is to this question. Okay, so one of the questions, or one of the answers should I say, that you could answer this question with is obviously dowel. So a dowel is a round piece of wood that we have, a very thin piece that we can actually push through and just literally drill a hole in the end. So you can have a dowel going through to make an axle, and then literally just make a wooden block that you just push onto the end, and it's also shaped just to round that dowel off. So really the answers to this question would either be a dowel, it could be a spindle, or it could be an axle. So any one of those would have given you 1 mark. The correct sort of mark that you would actually go for is to say that it would be a spindle or an axle made of dowel. Okay, let's look at question number 2. State the machine used to create the animal's eye in the child's toy. Okay, so we're looking at the actual image here, and we're assuming that the hole goes all the way through. So we know here that it's some kind of a drilling mechanism. So whether you've actually put various other things like a hand drill, an electric drill, a portable rechargeable drill, or the real answer we'd be looking for really to go for your first sort of point of call would be the pillar drill, which is the machine that you've used many times to drill holes into this type of material. So the answer to this question has to be a drill or a pillar drill. It may be if you just put drill, you might get a mark, but really you need to name the actual, whether it's a hand drill, pillar drill or rechargeable drill, just to ensure that you do get those marks. Okay, the third part of the question. The child's toy have different finishes applied. Explain why a finish is used. So I'm just going to pause here for a second, just to allow you to have a think of why we would need to finish wood. In other words, why we need to apply some sort of coating to it. Okay, so this is a 2-mark question, so we need to come up with at least 2 answers or 2 keywords or 2 reasons why we would apply a finish, because it's actually saying explain why the finish is used. So in this case, what I'd be looking for as an examiner would be a reason and the product. So let's look at those now then. So a clear explanation of staining the wood to create different coloured finishes on the wood, or a clear oil or varnish to give the wood a natural sort of colour. So that's the sort of thing I'm going to try and describe. So I could actually use that to say that it's the same wood, it's pine, but the designer or the manufacturer has used a wood stain to stain the wood different colours just to appeal to the buyer, or to make it more aesthetically pleasing. So in other words, it just looks a bit better. So that's the first reason why that would be. The second reason is obviously to protect the wood. So as we know, wood's a natural, comes from a natural product. We still say it's natural wood when it's actually been cut down as well. It's live, and just like us, it can get diseases. So we have to protect it by making it waterproof. So you could say you could apply a varnish to make it waterproof, or to seal the wood, to protect the wood. So that could also be another answer. To say that it looks better, probably you may get a mark for that, but that's a bit weak. So we can go for some of the other things as well. As it improves the finish, so it improves the look of it by making it a gloss. You could also say, as well as it making it waterproof, it's easy to clean, because you've protected it on there, and it also makes the product last a long time, so it would last longer than if we didn't. So you could use any of those as the answer to this question. You could probably say that it's there to attract the target user as well, so we've made them bright colours or different colours just to create a bit of interest to sell them. But the other thing is as well, because it's a child's toy, these things will get dirty, so by making them waterproof and putting a coating onto it, we could also help the process of cleaning them. So if they get dirty, or young children who would normally play with these, they've got food on the hands and they touch it and it needs cleaning, it's that type of thing. So it protects the wood from damage. So any of those marks would have got you the answer to this part. Let's look at the second sort of page to this one there. Okay, so these are quite common that we find on exam papers, which is usually to do with either a piece of equipment or a tool, a specific tool like a marking gauge, or it could be a process that they ask questions on. So the first thing we have to do is actually think of what this sort of product is. Now of course they won't have a picture of every tool that we have in the workshops, and certainly this doesn't look like the belt facer, the sanding wheel that we have in the workshops, but you can clearly tell that it's there to sand down the wood. So let's read the question for this part. So the image shows a piece of equipment used to finish parts of the child's toy. So for 1 mark, we need to state the name of this piece of equipment. So at this point I'm just going to pause while you have a think of the answer, and maybe if you want to write down the answer and check it in a moment, that may be the way forward. Okay, so the correct name for this piece of equipment is a disc sander. So ours is a belt sander because it goes round in a belt, whereas this is a disc because it's a disc that just spins round. So you may, if you just put a sanding machine, you may get that mark, but that really is down to the examiner who's marking the script, to be fair. So it's down to you, but the correct name for it is a disc sander. Okay, let's look at the next question then. Now the next question is out of 4 marks. So out of 4 marks, it's expecting us to write at least 4 stages, or to literally name 4 key elements of making it in the process to get those 4 marks. So the wooden toy has been constructed using a rectangular timber block. So what we need to do now is describe how to manufacture this body. So at this point I would like to think that what you would do is think how you would make this in the workshop. So we've got a square block of wood to start off with, and we need to cut out the profile of this shape. So give you a few seconds just to think of a few processes. If nothing else, you should know the starting process and the end process, so you know that the end will be to apply a finish, whether that's varnish, etc. That will always be the case, whether it's paint, varnish, oil, teak. We always end up finishing that one, and we always start by marking out in some way. So we know straight away we've got those 2 marks, but it's the other marks we need to fill in. Okay, let's look at what we could have done. So the first thing is we need to draw out, you've got this block of wood, and we need to draw out this shape down here. So the thing we could use is we could first of all create a template that we could draw around. So in other words, it's like a stencil that you would draw around, and that could be laser cut. So it's quite easy to laser cut a piece of card on the laser cutter and then place it onto here as a template just to draw around. The other thing is, of course, we could have just drawn it straight onto the wood. So that's another stage that we've got. The next stage is talk about the tools of what we've done. So we've marked out the main body of the toy using the template and the pencil. So that's pretty much how I would have wrote the first part. Okay, so if we know that at the end we've got to apply finish, we always do. We know that to apply finish we need to sand things down, so that will come before there. But once we've drawn it, we need a way of taking that shape out. So it's obvious that the next thing we need to do is we need to cut the shape out, but you need to explain how you would cut that out. So there's different ways we could cut this out. You could use a jigsaw or a scroll saw. You could use a bandsaw if you was an adult. Obviously in school you wouldn't use a bandsaw, but you could use a bandsaw. You could also use a coping saw, which is probably the one that I would expect most students to write, because you've used coping saws, and so you know that they're used to cope with those shapes. So the answer to this question, first of all, you would mark out with a pencil and a template that you've probably cut out on the laser cutter is number 1. The second part, you've marked it out using your pencil, and you're going to cut it out using a coping saw, so that would be 2. Once you've finished cutting it out, it's going to be rough, so you need to think, how would you smooth this down? So again, you need to think what you would do in the workshop, or what have you already done. So to cut rough things down, you could use things like a file, so you could file the edges to make them smooth. As well as using a file, you could use a sanding wheel or the disc sander, so that's also one way of saying that one. The second thing we could do, of course, is you could just use glass paper. We can put sandpaper, it does still exist, but that's pretty old school stuff now. Glass paper is what we would normally put down, so you could use those to sand those down. Of course, think of the question that's just happened here. You can look onto this part here and you're going to think, well, how am I going to cut out the hole? And the answer to that is, we know we'd be using a coping saw. We'd drill a hole first, put the blade through, tighten it up, and then cut that shape out. So that would be the answer to this sort of question, really. The next bit is, I've just mentioned the first bit, is the other processes you could put in is these holes need to be drilled. So part of that description you could write in there is that you would drill the holes for the wheels and maybe where the eye is using the pillar drill, or using a hand drill, or using an electric drill. So that would be the next stage. And then of course, before we get to the point down here, we would actually literally sand down the surface using glass paper anyway, and then you can talk about the different grades of glass paper. So you go from coarse right the way to a smooth one, and of course then you apply finish, which could be varnish, paint, etc. And that would be how I would make that product. And you literally just write that down. You can bullet point them, so stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and that should be the answer to that question. So I'll just quickly recap on the answer to this question. Once you've got the piece of wood, you need to mark it out somewhere. So marking out is always one, and we've used a template and a pencil to mark it out. The template could have been cut on the laser cutter. Number 2, once we've marked it out, we can then cut around the outside shape using either a jigsaw, a bandsaw, but most likely the answer that you need to remember is a coping saw, because that's what I would expect people to use, and you've already used them. So once you've cut that shape out, it needs to be sort of smoothed. So the way you could smooth the edges down is you could either go on the sanding belt or the disc sander to smooth the larger side, so these parts here. But where you've got the sort of profiles that look like bumps on here, the hedgehog spikes, ideally what you would need to use there is either a file, and you can actually specify a half round file, a circular file, or maybe even a rectangular file in some of the cases, but certainly a file, and that would get the edges smooth from there. We then need to put holes into it, so we would use, literally, you could talk about marking out where those are using centre punches, etc. first. So you could use a centre punch to start the hole, take it over to the pillar drill, make sure it's clamped into the hand vise or the machine vise, or it's clamped to the table, and then you would drill the holes using the pillar drill. And you could even specify what size drill bit you would be using for that if you wanted to, but it's only for 4 marks on here, so we've already covered quite a bit. Once we've drilled the holes, the final stages then, as we would expect you to do, is to sand it down. And you could sand it down using an electric sander, the portable sanders that you've used, the orbital sanders. You could use an oscillating sander, which is one of the palm sanders that we have. Alternatively, you could just use glass paper in various grades, going from rough to smooth. So remember, the rougher, of course, the paper is, sandpaper is, the lower the number. So 80 would be really, really rough, really coarse, and then something like 600 or 180 to 600 is classed as a finer sort of paper. And of course then once you've sanded it down, you need to apply finish to protect it, exactly what the other questions have said earlier, and you can do that by either painting it, applying the varnish, applying a wood stain, and that would be how you would get those marks. So that's the talk through for the first part of the woods questions on the past paper. So the idea is, from this point, is you would just keep reading through or watching this video until you can recall the correct sequences and the answers to the questions. And a lot of these products that you will find in your exam paper would be very, very similar to this. So this is part 1. Make sure you join us for week 2 and for part 2 as we go through the next part of the exam paper and questions. And hopefully this is just a good way of you revising by listening to us as teachers and examiners on how we would answer these questions and approach these questions on the exam paper.